The chamber was built to intimidate. That was the honest truth of it. The Imperial Council Hall on Vorith Prime had been designed by architects who understood power, who knew that high ceilings made visitors feel small, that cold stone floors swallowed sound so voices carried thin and uncertain, that the raised dais where the council sat put every delegation below eye level by exactly enough to matter. Thousands of species had stood on that floor over the centuries. Most of them had left agreeing to things they hadn't planned to agree to. The human delegation walked in like they hadn't read the architectural memo. There were 3 of them. Ambassador Yara Ose led, her footsteps unhurried on the pale stone. She was a small woman by human standards, compact, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair going silver at the temples. She carried no weapon visible to any scanner in the room. She carried no entourage. Just 2 aides at her back, both younger, both wearing the same calm expression she wore, as if they had all agreed on it before walking through the door. Imperial Assessor Vorak watched them cross the floor from his position at the council table. He was Vithrani, tall, blue-gray, with 4 upper arms folded across his chest in the traditional posture of formal authority. He had been conducting alliance audits for 30 years. He had a sense for delegations that understood what was happening to them and delegations that did not. He could not read the humans. That was mildly irritating. The session opened with the standard formalities: planetary designation, alliance tier confirmation, years of membership. Earth, Tier 1, 83 years. The clerk read the numbers in the flat tone used for things that were about to change. Vorak let the formalities finish before he stood. The Council has completed its review of Earth's military contribution record, he said. His translator rendered it in the clean, neutral tones the chamber used for official proceedings. The findings require discussion. Ambassador Osai nodded once. She had taken her seat at the delegation table below the dais. Her hands were folded on top of it. Her datapad sat to her right, untouched. Vorak activated the display above the council table. Numbers filled the air in glowing columns. Human performance metrics from joint operations spanning 4 decades. Physical endurance scores. Reaction time indices. Wound recovery rates. Comparative lethality assessments measured against 17 other Tier 1 species. In every recorded joint engagement, Vorak continued, human units ranked at or near the bottom of physical performance metrics. Lowest recorded healing factor among Tier 1 members. Shortest natural lifespan. No documented psionic capacity. No natural armor. No inherent toxin resistance. He paused for the numbers to settle into the room. The Council does not question Earth's dedication to the Alliance. The question is one of genuine military utility. One of the other Council members, Assessor Dreen, a Salhari with pale eyes, leaned forward. We have also noted that in 41 joint operations, human units were never deployed to primary engagement zones, only secondary support and auxiliary functions. That is consistent with the record, Vorak confirmed. He looked at Yara. She was looking at the numbers in the air above her. Her expression had not changed since she walked in. The motion before the Council, Vorak said, is to reclassify Earth's alliance standing from Tier 1 to Tier 3 observer status. This would reflect the practical realities of the contribution data and allow the Council to allocate Tier 1 resources to members better positioned to carry them. He waited for the protest. They always protested here. Yara reached out and picked up her datapad. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it back down. Assessor Vorak, she said. Her voice was even. Not loud, not soft, just placed in the room with the confidence of someone who had never worried about being heard. Can I ask a procedural question before we go further? You may. The contribution data you're referencing, the performance metrics, the deployment records, the engagement outcomes, where did that data originate? Vorak glanced at the clerk. Standard submission. Earth filed its military contribution reports through the Alliance Documentation Protocol. Every member does. Right, Yara said, so the data came from us. A small silence. That is correct. Yara nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. And the units referenced in those reports, the ones in the joint operations, the ones with the low physical metrics and the auxiliary roles, she paused. Did anyone on the council verify their classification within Earth's military structure? Vorek's four arms shifted slightly. Classification verification is not standard protocol for contribution reports. I know, Yara said. She picked up her datapad again. This time she turned it over once in her hands, a small, idle movement. Then she set it down with a quiet click on the stone table. Those weren't our soldiers, she said. The words were not loud. They were not dramatic. She said them the way someone states a correction to a minor arithmetic error, patient, slightly apologetic for the inconvenience. The chamber went still. Assessor Dreen's pale eyes shifted. Two other council members exchanged a look. Vorek kept his expression arranged into the professionally neutral configuration he had spent 3 decades perfecting, but something behind it had gone very slightly wrong. I'm sorry, Dreen said. Units in your data, Yara said. She folded her hands again. They weren't soldiers, not in any classification that Earth's military uses for that word. They were auxiliary reserve volunteers, civilian adjacent, people with basic training who agreed to participate in joint operations because the Alliance asked for bodies and we provided them. She tilted her head a fraction. We gave you exactly what the documentation protocol asked for, contribution units. We contributed units. You're saying, Vorek began. I'm saying the data is accurate, Yara said. Those people performed exactly as documented. I'm not disputing a single number in your report. She looked up at the glowing columns of metrics. I'm just telling you they were not representative. The silence that followed had a different texture than the one before. That one had been the silence of a chamber waiting for something to happen. This one was the silence of a chamber in which something already had. Vorek looked at her for a long moment. If those units were not representative of Earth's military capacity, he said carefully, then what was your reasoning for not deploying representative units? Yara considered the question, with what appeared to be genuine thoughtfulness. No situation in our joint operational history warranted it, she said. Assessor Dreen made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Counselor Marin, the eldest member of the table, a gray-furred Helvasi who had said nothing until now, leaned forward very slightly. Her voice was quieter than the others. Ambassador, are you telling this council that in 83 years of Alliance membership, across 41 joint operations, Earth never once encountered a situation it considered serious enough to deploy its actual military? Yara looked at her. Something in the look wasn't unkind, but it wasn't soft either. That's correct, she said. Counselor Marin sat back. One of Yara's aides, the younger one, a man named Reuben who had been still as furniture since they sat down, shifted almost imperceptibly in his seat. Not from nerves, from something else, a kind of patience that had its own weight. Vorek pulled up the motion document on his display. He looked at it. He looked at the human delegation. The motion was still on the table. The numbers were still in the air. Nothing had technically changed in the procedural sense. But the room had changed. The council will require time to consider your statement, Vorek said finally. The words came out more carefully than he intended. Of course, Yara said. She picked up her datapad and stood. Her aides rose with her, movements synchronized not by drill but by familiarity, the easy coordination of people who had worked together for a long time in rooms where things mattered. She paused at the delegation table. I would suggest, she said, not looking up, that before the council finalizes any motion, your intelligence office cross-references the contribution data with Earth's Defense Classification Registry. She finally looked up. Not because I'm requesting it, just because it will save time later. She nodded once to the council. Then she walked out, the same unhurried pace she had walked in with, her footsteps quiet on the stone. Her two aides at her back. The chamber sat in the silence she left behind. Vorek stared at the glowing columns of metrics, the low scores, the auxiliary designations, the 41 operations where human units had done support work and nothing more. He had presented those numbers as evidence of weakness. He was beginning to feel, in a way he could not yet articulate, that they were something else entirely. He closed the motion document without archiving it. For the first time in 30 years of conducting Alliance audits, Vorek went back to his office and pulled up a blank investigation file before the session was even formally adjourned. He stared at it for a while. Then he started typing. Seal had been an intelligence analyst for the Imperial Council for 11 years. She was good at it, not in the way that got you promoted into rooms with windows. She was too quiet for that, too likely to sit still with a problem for 3 days before saying anything about it. But she was good in the way that mattered, which was that when she pulled a thread, she pulled the right one, and she didn't let go until she understood what it was attached to. Vorek had assigned her the Earth cross-reference at the end of the session, a formality, he'd said, background verification before the council resumed deliberations, standard due diligence. He had said it like he believed it. Seal didn't think he believed it. She started where any analyst started, the public record. Earth's formal contribution reports to the Alliance, 83 years of them, filed in clean quarterly intervals with the kind of bureaucratic consistency that said whoever was managing the documentation had been doing it for a very long time and had no intention of making it interesting. The reports were accurate. She checked them against 3 independent data streams and they held. The units were real. The personnel numbers matched. The performance metrics were recorded honestly, in some cases worse than what the Council's own observers had noted, which meant Earth wasn't inflating anything. They were submitting numbers that made themselves look unremarkable, and those numbers were real. She pulled the classification registry Yara had mentioned. That was where the first thing happened. The contribution units, the auxiliary reserve volunteers and the joint operation reports, sat in a classification bracket that Seal had to look up. She wasn't familiar with the designation. When she found it, she read the definition twice. Civilian-trained auxiliary reserve, non-active, no operational clearance, equivalent to what the Empire called a civic emergency corps, people with basic training maintained for infrastructure protection and disaster response. Not combat units, not even close. She sat with that for a moment. Then she pulled Earth's active military registry, which was partially accessible through the Alliance documentation protocol. Not the full record, that was behind a closed classification wall, but the structural index, the tier designations, the size estimates. The auxiliary reserve that had participated in 41 joint operations represented, by the structural index, approximately 4% of Earth's total documented military personnel. Seal read that number again. 4%. The Alliance had been evaluating Earth's military capacity based on 4% of it. The bottom 4%, judging by the classification tiers. She opened a new file and started pulling historical Earth conflict records, not the Alliance era before it. Earth's own wars, its own engagements, the centuries of recorded military history that predated first contact. The Alliance archives had some of it, compiled from Earth's own historical submissions and from early contact-era surveys. She started reading. 3 hours later, Seal's tea had gone cold and she hadn't noticed. The data didn't fit the story the Council had been telling itself about Earth. She kept looking for the explanation, the asterisk, the exaggerating factor, the methodological note that would bring the numbers back down to something that made sense alongside the auxiliary unit performance scores. She didn't find one. She found a small moon called Calder's Rock instead. It was in the outer record, a contested sovereignty dispute 212 years ago, before Earth joined the Alliance, between human colonists and a species called the Keth who no longer existed as a political entity. The Keth had wanted the moon. The humans had been there first. Standard territorial friction, the kind that happened in the outer systems every few decades. Except the record didn't go the standard way. The Keth had committed a full military division, approximately 12,000 soldiers, to take Calder's Rock. It was a moon. It had about 800 human colonists and a garrison of somewhere between 1 and 200 soldiers. The record was unclear on the exact number. The Keth assumed it would take a week. It took 11 years. 11 years of rotating Keth forces, resupply missions, new commanders, tactical revisions, orbital bombardment attempts that kept getting answered by things the Keth apparently hadn't predicted. The colonial garrison took casualties, significant ones. The numbers in the record showed a human force that should have been ground down to nothing within months. It wasn't. On year 11, the Keth commander filed a report recommending withdrawal. The report cited unsustainable attrition ratios and engagement patterns inconsistent with projected human military capacity. The Keth pulled out. The moon remained human. The Keth eventually stopped being a political entity for reasons the historical record attributed to other factors, but Seal noticed that their military confidence had never quite recovered from Calder's Rock. The references were oblique, but they were there. She flagged the file, then kept pulling. She found 14 more in the next 4 hours. Different eras, different opponents, different scales. A siege here, a contested route there, an engagement on a frozen planet that had no strategic value except that humans had been on it and refused to leave. The pattern was not one of a species that won through overwhelming force. It was a species that absorbed cost in ways that didn't make sense and kept functioning anyway. It wore things down. It outlasted things that should have outlasted it. And in every case, the forces involved were small. Not the full weight of Earth's military. Small units, detachments. The kinds of numbers that said these weren't the main effort. These were the ones someone sent because the situation needed a body and a gun, not because anyone expected them to do what they did. Seal sat back. She was thinking about the auxiliary reserve units, the 4% at the bottom, the ones that had participated in 41 joint operations and logged mediocre numbers while never being asked to do anything important. She was thinking about what the data looked like on the other 96%. She didn't have access to that data. It was behind the closed classification wall. Earth had never submitted it, which meant the Alliance had never asked for it. Which meant for 83 years, the Council had been assessing Earth's military value based on the equivalent of asking to see a species clerks, and then deciding they weren't good fighters. Seal pressed her hands flat on her desk. She thought about the way Yara Osai had set down her datapad in the Council chamber, the small click of it on stone, the folded hands, the patience that didn't look like patience, that looked like someone waiting for a conclusion they already knew was coming. No situation warranted it. That's what she had said. 41 joint operations, 83 years, and not once had Earth looked at any of it and thought, this is serious enough. Seal opened a message to her superior, Senior Assessor Vorak. She typed and deleted 3 different versions of what she wanted to say, because all 3 of them sounded wrong when she read them back, too alarmed, or not alarmed enough, or clinical in a way that missed the thing she was actually trying to convey. She settled on 4 lines. The contribution units were auxiliary reserve, non-active classification. They represent roughly 4% of Earth's total documented military structure. We have never seen a human soldier, not a real one. She sent it. Then she pulled up the closed classification index, not to breach it, just to look at it. To look at how many entries were behind that wall, how many files Earth had submitted into sealed storage, accessible only by mutual consent, never requested. The index had a counter, just a number, no details, showing how many sealed documents existed in Earth's restricted partition. Seal looked at the number. She looked at it for a while. Then she closed the index, opened her message history, and stared at the 4 lines she had sent to Vorak until she heard back from him 12 minutes later. His message was 2 words: keep pulling. She kept pulling. By the time the building's overnight lights shifted to low, Seal had built a picture that she kept turning over in her mind, looking for the angle that made it less significant. She couldn't find one. Somewhere on Earth, there were soldiers that no one in the galaxy had ever seen, not in 83 years of alliance, not in any joint operation, not in any engagement large enough to make the public record in a way that connected to a human flag. They existed behind a wall Earth had built quietly, over decades, while attending council meetings and filing paperwork and nodding along to assessors who told them their metrics were disappointing. Seal thought about Calder's Rock again: 800 colonists, 200 soldiers. 11 years. And those weren't even the real ones. The Imperial High Council did not panic. That was important to them, the not panicking. They were the governing body of a civilization that spanned 400 star systems and had maintained order across species that could not agree on the correct number of limbs a person should have. Panic was for lesser institutions. What they did instead was call a closed session and speak very quietly for a long time. Vorak presented Seal's findings in full. He walked through the auxiliary classification, the 4% figure, the Calder's Rock record, and the 14 other historical engagements that Seal had flagged. He presented them without editorial, the way a doctor reads a scan result to a patient before the conversation about what it means. The room was quiet in a way that had weight to it. Counselor Marin was the first to speak. She asked the question everyone was sitting on: what is behind the classification wall? Earth has not authorized access, Vorak said. We haven't requested it, Dreen said. We are requesting it now, said Counselor Marin. The formal request went out within the hour. Alliance protocol required a response within 10 standard days. Earth acknowledged receipt of the request in 4 minutes, which was itself a small, notable thing, because 4 minutes meant someone had been waiting for it. The response to the actual request came 3 days later. Earth submitted 1 file. 1. The accompanying note from Ambassador Osai was brief. In the interest of the Council's ongoing review, Earth is providing access to 1 declassified operational record. We believe it will address the Council's immediate questions. Vorak stared at the note for a moment, then he opened the file. It was called the Meridian Protocol. The operation had taken place 42 years ago. A contested transit corridor in the outer systems, no alien observers, no joint operation framework, a purely human engagement against a hostile force that the record identified only as the Veskari Collective. The Veskari did not appear in current Alliance records. Vorak checked. They were not a member species, not a recognized political entity, not listed in any active diplomatic registry. He made a note to find out what had happened to the Veskari Collective. He kept reading. The engagement parameters were, on their face, unremarkable. A human unit had been cut off from extraction during a retreat. Standard military misfortune. The kind of thing that happened to everyone. The unit was designated Meridian Team, 12 personnel. The hostile force surrounding them numbered in the thousands. The record listed 4,200 Veskari combatants in the engagement zone, with more in supporting positions beyond the immediate perimeter. 12 humans. Surrounded. 0 viable extraction window. Vorak passed the file to the Council's War Analysis Division and told them to review it completely before the next session. He didn't tell them what was in it. He wanted clean reactions. He got them. The analysis team came back in 3 days. They requested a second review period. Vorak gave it to them. They came back again and asked for a meeting rather than filing a written report. That was the moment Vorak understood the file was real. The analysts sat around the table and walked through it section by section. The 12 Meridian personnel had held their position for 19 days. Not defensively. They had fortified, yes, but they had also conducted 18 separate offensive operations during those 19 days. Raids, disruptions, elimination of command assets in the surrounding force. Actions that a surrounded unit with zero extraction window had no strategic reason to conduct unless the goal was not survival. Unless the goal was something else. On day 19, the Meridian team had counterattacked. The analysts used the word counterattacked, and then sat quietly while Vorak absorbed what that meant for a team of 12 surrounded by 4,000. 9 of the 12 walked out of the engagement zone, moving through former enemy territory, unimpeded. Every Veskari combatant in the theater was accounted for in the casualty records. All of them. The room was very quiet for a while. One analyst, a young Helvasi named Torin who had studied military history for 20 years, said that he had reviewed the engagement pattern, and the only comparable operational behavior in his database was a category of warfare that most species used for large-scale theater operations: coordinated multi-vector assault, systematic priority targeting, force multiplication through psychological disruption. 12 people, he said, had conducted a theater-level campaign. Were they enhanced? Counselor Dreen asked at the session. Technological augmentation, external support. Vorak had checked. Standard issue equipment consistent with the era, no augmentation recorded. Could the record be fabricated? We ran verification against 3 independent data authentication systems, Vorak said. The record is original, unaltered. Marin had her hands folded on the table. She had a stillness about her that Vorak associated with people who had already moved past the question. Everyone else was still asking. What were the psychological assessment reports from the Meridian team post-engagement? Vorak pulled them. He had read them the night before and had not slept well. They are, he paused, clinical. The team filed standard after-action reports, detailed, accurate, methodical. They noted casualties on their side. They documented objectives met. They flagged items for equipment improvement. He looked at the table. There are no distress indicators, no trauma flags, no anomalous language. He set down the report. They wrote about it the way a tradesperson files a summary at the end of a job, he said. They were not frightened. They were not traumatized. They were, he searched for the word, working. No one spoke for a moment. Counselor Marin looked at him with her pale eyes. How many soldiers does Earth have classified above the Meridian tier? Vorak's expression didn't change. That question is what I intend to ask. He requested a formal session with Ambassador Osai the following morning. She arrived with the same 2 aides, the same unhurried pace, the same expression. Reuben, the younger aide, set a portfolio on the delegation table and did not open it. The other aide, a woman named Lynn, sat with her hands in her lap and watched the council table without appearing to watch anyone in particular. Vorak asked the question directly. Ambassador, the Meridian Protocol has been reviewed by our analysis team. We have no follow-up questions about the record itself. He paused. We have one question. How many soldiers does Earth have classified at or above the Meridian operational tier? Yara looked at him. She didn't look at her datapad. She didn't look at her aides. That's not a number I'm authorized to share, she said. The silence afterward was not like the silence after her first statement in the original session. That one had been surprise. This one was something different. This one had edges. Vorak nodded slowly. He had prepared for this answer. He had not been prepared for how it would feel to receive it, the understanding, arriving fully formed and unwanted, that Earth was not refusing because the number was embarrassing or strategically sensitive in a conventional way. Earth was declining to share it because sharing it would change something that couldn't be changed back. I understand, he said. Yara held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, the same small, precise nod she had given the council at the end of the first session. She stood, her aide stood with her. At the door she paused. She didn't turn around. The Meridian team's personnel files are included in the protocol document, she said. If your analysts want to read them, the personal histories, the backgrounds, the enlistment records there in the appendix. A pause. They volunteered for that mission, all 12 of them. She left. Vorak sat at the council table after the chamber emptied. He thought about 12 people who had volunteered to be surrounded by 4,000, who had spent 19 days in a position with no extraction window conducting offensive operations, who had written their after-action reports in the calm language of people doing a job they understood. He thought about the classified wall behind which Earth's full military record sat, undisturbed, in a partition no one had ever thought to ask about. 9 walked out. He kept coming back to that, not 12, 9. Somewhere there were families of 3 people who had not walked out of the Meridian corridor. Somewhere there were names on something. A wall, a record, a monument of some kind. And somewhere there were the 9 who had walked out, who had filed their paperwork, and gone home. Vale had a reputation for being the kind of analyst who asked questions no one had thought to ask, until it was already too late to be comfortable with the answers. This was considered a useful quality in Imperial intelligence work, right up until the moment it wasn't. Vale had ended up in the Strategic Assessment Division, because it was the one department that still wanted people who made their superiors uneasy in productive ways. She had been reconstructing enemy doctrine and alliance behavior patterns for 16 years. She was very good at seeing the shape of a thing from its outline rather than its interior. Vorak gave her the Earth file 2 days after the Meridian session. He didn't brief her on the Meridian protocol first. He gave her the raw material, 83 years of alliance behavior records, the contribution reports, the joint operation logs, the diplomatic correspondence, the council session transcripts, and told her to build a picture of Earth's strategic posture from the outside in. He wanted to know what Earth was doing and why. Vale spent 4 days with the material without sleeping much. On the 5th day, she walked into Vorak's office and stood in front of his desk and said, "They've been managing us." Vorak looked up. "For 83 years," Vale said. "Not manipulating, not deceiving, not exactly, just managing, calibrating their visible behavior to produce a specific perception, methodically and consistently across 8 decades. She set a summary document on his desk. Every concession in the record, every time Earth yielded on a trade negotiation or stepped back from a territorial question or allowed a council vote to go against their stated preference, I mapped the outcomes. She tapped the document. In 61 of 68 recorded concession events, the concession produced a de-escalation that benefited long-term alliance stability, not short-term Earth benefit, long-term stability. That could be diplomatic skill, Vorak said. It could be, Vale said, except for this. She turned to the second section of her summary. The joint operations, 41 engagements across 4 decades. Earth was invited to participate in all of them. They sent auxiliary units, the 4% we now know about, to every single one. In 37 of those 41 operations, there was a moment during planning or early execution where the operation was at risk of failure. A moment where a more capable force contribution could have changed the outcome materially. And Earth didn't escalate in any of them. Vale looked at him steadily. 37 times a human officer embedded with the joint command structure was in the room when the operation was struggling. 37 times they had the option to request authorization for additional asset deployment, Earth's actual assets. She paused. They never did. Vorak stared at the summary. They calculated that the situations didn't warrant it, he said slowly. Or, Vale said, they calculated that revealing what they had would change the nature of the alliance in ways they didn't want, and so they managed the exposure, every time. She pulled out one more sheet. There's more. He took it. It was a memo, old paper formatting from the era before the council moved to full digital record, dated 30 years ago. The header identified it as an internal Imperial strategic communication, classified at the highest tier, marked for the Emperor's eyes only. "Where did you find this?" Vorik asked. "The Burial Archive," Vale said. "Documents that were approved for one purpose and then officially withdrawn from circulation, technically accessible to senior assessors during formal investigations. I had clearance, and I pulled everything in Earth's adjacent files." She pointed at the memo. "Read it." He read it. It was a proposal, an internal Imperial proposal drafted by the Strategic Provocation Division, a department that officially did not exist and practically did, recommending that Earth be subjected to a controlled border incident, a manufactured provocation, small enough to be deniable, large enough to require a military response. The goal, stated in the clean bureaucratic language of people planning something they could not put plain words to, was capability verification through applied stress. They wanted to start a small fight with Earth to see what Earth would do. The proposal had been approved, all the way up the chain, signed off at every level. An operation date had been assigned. Then it had been buried. Withdrawn, marked inactive, filed into the archive where it had sat for 30 years, officially invisible. Vorik turned to the final page. The burial order was signed by the previous emperor, Rithvan IV, who had ruled for 60 years and was generally remembered as cautious and long-sighted. The burial order was 2 sentences. It said the operation was suspended pending further review, and that no revival of the proposal would be considered without direct imperial authorization. Attached to the burial order was a single advisory document, 1 page, no official header, no author designation, no seal. Vale watched him read it. The advisory was brief. It acknowledged the proposal's intent. It described, in measured terms, what the proposal's authors had apparently not fully considered: that a controlled border incident would require Earth to respond, that an Earth military response to a provocation of that kind would not look like the auxiliary reserve units the Empire had observed in joint operations, and that once the Empire had seen what a genuine response looked like, the relationship between the 2 civilizations would be permanently altered. The advisory did not use the word threat. It did not contain anything that could be called an ultimatum. It was written in the language of a party offering a considered opinion to another party before a consequential decision. The last line read, "We would prefer you didn't." No signature. Vorik set the document down. He looked at it sitting on his desk. He looked at the date on the burial order. He looked at the 2-sentence withdrawal and the Emperor's seal, and the 30 years this had sat undisturbed in an archive. "The Emperor received this advisory," he said. He wasn't asking. "Yes," Vale said. "And he killed the operation. Within 72 hours of receiving it, fastest imperial decision recorded in that administration." Vale's voice was careful. The advisory came from an unregistered diplomatic channel, not a formal Earth government communication. The origin point in the archive record is just Earth, no specific office, no individual name. Vorik thought about that. An unofficial document, no header, no signature, sent through a channel that didn't formally exist to stop an operation that officially never happened. And an emperor who had ruled for 60 years and presumably understood power had read it and buried the operation in 72 hours. He was frightened, Vorik said. Vale didn't answer that directly. He was informed, she said. The advisory didn't threaten, it described. It laid out what would happen in plain language and expressed a preference. She paused. Rithvan IV was not easily frightened. His record is full of decisions that required nerve. She picked up her summary documents from the desk. He read 1 page from an unsigned source and made the fastest decision of his administration. Vorik looked at the wall of his office for a moment. He was thinking about 8 decades of concessions that weren't weakness. 41 joint operations where Earth had sent the wrong units on purpose. 37 moments where a human officer had stood in a room with the option to escalate and chosen not to. He was thinking about the Meridian Protocol, 12 people, 4,000 enemies, 19 days. And those weren't the real soldiers. Who sent the advisory? He asked. I don't know, Vale said. I'm not sure it matters. She moved toward the door. What matters is that someone on Earth knew about the operation. A classified Imperial proposal approved at the highest levels, kept inside the tightest security classification the Empire uses. She stopped at the door. And they knew about it. She left. Vorik sat alone with the unsigned advisory on his desk. We would prefer you didn't. 7 words, no threats, no demands, no description of consequences, just a preference stated. And an emperor who understood what that preference meant without needing it spelled out. Vorik opened his terminal and pulled up the counter on Earth's sealed classification partition. The one seal had found, the number of documents behind the wall Earth had built in their Alliance archive. Documents that had never been requested, never been accessed, never been part of any review. He looked at the number. He thought about what Vale had said. Managing us. Not manipulating. Just calibrating. Deciding, consistently and over a very long time, exactly how much to show and exactly how much to keep behind the wall. The motion to downgrade Earth's Alliance status was still technically on the Council agenda. Vorik closed the partition counter. He opened the motion document. He archived it. Not withdrawn, not voted on, just archived quietly, without fanfare, into the part of the Council record where things went when they were not going to be discussed again. Then he started drafting a different kind of document entirely. The formal communication arrived at the Earth Embassy on Vorith Prime on a Tuesday morning, delivered through official Imperial channels with a level of procedural care that the embassy staff noted was unusual. Not unprecedented. The Empire understood ceremony, but unusual in the specific way that said someone senior had reviewed the drafting personally. The communication formally withdrew the Tier 3 reclassification motion. It also requested a renegotiation of Earth's alliance terms. Upward. The Empire wanted more human involvement in joint operations, more access to Earth's military consultation resources, deeper integration of human strategic advisors into Imperial command structures. The language was careful and specific, and had clearly been written by someone who understood that the request needed to be phrased in a way that didn't sound like what it was, which was an institution that had just discovered it had been sitting next to something it didn't understand for 83 years, and was now trying to get closer to it without admitting why. Ambassador Yara Osai read the communication once. She set it on her desk. She read it again. Then she sent one message to Earth. They've asked, what do we want to tell them? The reply came back in 6 hours. Come home, we'll talk. She left for Earth the next morning. The building where the consultation took place was not what anyone who had spent time in Imperial architecture would have expected from a civilization that apparently contained the Meridian Protocol. It was old, low-ceilinged, on the edge of a coastal city, with windows that looked out at gray water under a gray sky. There were no guards at the door, or rather, there were no guards that were visible, which was a different thing. The room held a long table and 8 people. None of them wore uniforms. This was the part that always surprised people who met them for the first time, the absence of uniforms. The people in this room did not need to perform authority. They had stopped needing that a long time ago. Yara sat at the table and put the Imperial communication in the center of it. An older man named Adiz, who had the kind of stillness that came from having been in too many rooms where things went wrong, picked it up and read it. He passed it left without comment. It went around the table. They want in, said a woman named Tors. She was the youngest person there by about 20 years. She said it without judgment, just as an observation about what the document contained. They want to feel safe, said a man named Chukwu. He had the slightly distracted manner of someone whose mind was always running a few steps ahead of the conversation. Which is different? Is it achievable? Adiz asked. It was directed at the room generally. Silence for a moment. Not by showing them more, said Lin, Yara's aide, who had been in every council session and had said nothing in any of them until now. Every time we show them more, they recalibrate and the threshold moves. We could spend 50 years revealing capability in controlled increments, and they'd spend all 50 years in a low-grade state of existential anxiety. That's not safe. That's managed fear. We've been managing it for 80 years, Tor said. We've been managing our exposure, Lin said. That's different. We weren't managing their fear. They didn't know enough to be afraid. They know now, Yara said. Everyone looked at her. The Meridian file changed things, she said. They were never going to stay comfortable with the auxiliary unit story once they started pulling real records. Meridian was the minimum we could give them that was honest. She looked at the communication in the center of the table. They're not asking for more data. They're asking for relationship. They want to know where they stand with us. Adiz looked at the gray water through the window for a moment. And where do they stand with us? The question sat on the table. It was the real question. Not strategy, not protocol, not what to show and what to keep behind the wall. The actual question underneath all the others. Chukwu leaned forward. We joined the alliance because the galaxy is large and even we don't know everything that's in it. We've maintained the alliance because the relationships are real, even when the power dynamics are uncomfortable. The Empire has, he paused. They've been arrogant. They have historically treated smaller species badly. They designed a chamber to make everyone feel small. He picked up the communication. This document is written by people who have recently had an experience that has made them think differently. That is valuable. Or they want to get close enough to understand what they're dealing with, Tors said. Not an accusation, just the other reading. Both can be true, Yara said. She reached into her portfolio and put a second document on the table. She had drafted it on the flight home, revised it 3 times, and had left the ending open because she wanted the room to close it. I want to send them this instead, she said. They read it. It was not a capability disclosure. It contained no new data, no military records, no access to the classification wall. It was a behavioral document, 2 sections, simply written in language that any council member could read without a translator's intermediary layer softening the meaning. The first section was a list of commitments, things Earth would do as an alliance member. Honest things, substantive things, some of them more than the Empire had expected to receive. Consultation access, strategic advisory integration, a new joint operations framework built around genuine capability rather than auxiliary theater. The second section was different. It was short, 3 items. Each one described a condition, a type of action, a category of behavior, and stated plainly that if that condition was met, Earth's current posture within the alliance would change. Not a threat. There were no consequences described. No response actions listed, just, if this happens, things will be different. The room read it quietly. Tors looked up first. The third item, she said. Yes, Yara said. They've already done it once, 30 years ago. They buried it, Yara said. Someone in that administration understood what the third item meant without being told. I want the current administration to understand it explicitly, so there's no confusion the next time someone writes a proposal. Adiz set his copy down. This is a remarkable document, he said. There was something careful in his voice. It is almost entirely an offer. It is generous in relative terms. Almost entirely, Tors said. The second section is not an offer, Adiz said. No, Yara said, it's not. He looked at her. Do you think they'll understand it? Vorek will, she said. She thought about the assessor in the chamber. The professional neutrality that had slipped, just slightly, in the moment after she said asterisk those weren't our soldiers asterisk. The man was not stupid. He was not unintelligent or incurious. He had looked at the Meridian file with the eyes of someone who wanted to understand rather than someone who wanted to dismiss. He'll read it correctly. Adiz picked it up again, looked at the second section one more time. "Send it," he said. The document arrived at the Imperial Council 3 days later. Vorak read it at his desk at the end of a session day when the building was mostly empty. He read the first section carefully, noting the specifics, the genuine substance of what was being offered. He recognized that this was more than the Empire had asked for in some respects. He understood that it was being offered freely, which was its own kind of signal. Then he read the second section. He read the 3 items. He sat with them for a long time. He did not look up the first item in the behavioral records. He understood it immediately. He did not need to look up the second item either. He had lived through the events it described. He had been a junior assessor at the time. He had filed reports on it. He turned to the third item. He read it. He sat back in his chair. His office was quiet. The building had that emptied quality of an institution after hours, when the procedural noise fell away and what was left was just walls and document lights and the low sound of a city outside. 30 years ago, someone in this building had approved an operation against Earth and then received a document that said we would prefer you didn't, and the Emperor had buried the operation in 72 hours. Everyone involved had assumed that was caution, good judgment, a wise ruler knowing when to step back. Vorak looked at the third item. The Empire had met the condition of the third item. 30 years ago. The buried operation was not caution. It was not the Emperor stepping back. It was the Emperor reading a document from a civilization that had sent auxiliary reserve units to 41 joint operations and wondering what was on the other side of that wall and making a decision about whether he wanted to find out that way. Vorak thought about the Meridian Protocol, 12 people, a moon called Calder's Rock, an unsigned advisory with 7 words. He thought about the document in front of him and the 3 items in its second section, and the fact that one of them had already been true for 30 years on Earth, had spent those 30 years sending auxiliary clerks to joint operations and attending council meetings and allowing votes to go against them, and saying nothing. Not because they couldn't. He turned off his desk light. He sat in the dark for a while. He thought about what it meant to sit next to something for 83 years without knowing what it was, to assess it and file reports on it and move to downgrade its status. To do all of that while the thing sat quietly on the other side of the table with its hands folded, contributing exactly what was asked for and nothing more, watching and waiting for a situation that warranted something different. He thought about whether that situation had ever been close. He thought about the 3 items. He decided he did not want to know how close it had been. In the morning, he would bring the document to Councillor Marin and the full council, and they would discuss the first section in detail, because the first section was a genuine and substantial offer and deserved a genuine and substantial response. He would make sure the second section was read in full. He would make sure they understood the difference between the 2 sections, what one was and what the other was. He would make sure they understood the third item in particular. But that was morning. Right now, Vorak sat in the dark in an empty building on a planet the Empire had built to be impressive, and he thought about 800 colonists on a moon who had held for 11 years, and 12 soldiers in a corridor who had written their after-action reports in the calm language of a job completed, and a civilization that had spent 83 years in an alliance and never once been asked the right question. He did not sleep well that night. Not because the list was long, because it was short. 3 items, and the Empire had already done one of them.